Hi everybody, it's Bob Foley from Latham Country. Today we are in northeast Nebraska, and I wanted to have a conversation about fixed ear length, flex ear, semi-flex ear, semi-determinate ear, and just see if we can draw a basic understanding so when you look in the product guide and you're doing product placements, you understand what's going on. So we have a fortunate position here today at this research location that we have where our mini strips are. We actually have an irrigated planting and about 1,000 feet away a dryland planting, and so the same trials, Lyle had me put the same trials in both locations, so we have a very good idea of ability to take the sandier ground in the dryland, although they've had pretty good rainfall, and you'll see that in our ear samples that we look at. And we have the examples of unlimited capability other than heat and fertility, but as far as water and moisture goes behind us. So this is what our typical research plot looks like. These are our walkways. The start of a hybrid on this side, and about 25 feet that way will be another walkway, and that's the length of a hybrid. We do 4-row plots and harvest the middle two. All of our data come off the bordered rows. So the ears we have today, when we say an end plant, will actually be from the end of one of these rows. When we say an internalized plant, it will actually be from the center of the rows, where it would be more like the farmer has. So we try to minimize the width of these alleys. This one is put wide for a showcase so somebody could come through and teach and train. But typically our alleys are about this wide, about 1.5 feet, and so we minimize this stretch ear that happens with almost every hybrid today. So the flex phenomenon really started way back in the 30s and 40s, you know, when we were coming off of open pollinated hybrids and we were coming into plant breeding as it started. You know, your grandfathers, your great-grandfathers 100 years ago were planting rows that were based off the width of a horse, and so 40-inch rows, 48-inch rows were not uncommon, and they were planting, you know, 3,000 to 4,000 plants an acre. And some farmers got wise to the idea of population, and they started to check roll their fields. So if you've ever seen a check roll planter, it's got a cable on it that drops every so many feet, and they turn and do the same field the other direction, and it would be in a grid style when they got done planting. And their cultivators were built to do that, and their planters were built to do that. So those hybrids having such wide low densities, wide plant spacings, were getting very long ears. I've seen ears as, you know, from the tip of my fingertips to my elbow, from germplasm that's way in the back. And Phil Long actually in Alexander has a demo, if you happen to be down there, of a predecessor to a lot of the corn breeding called Reed's Yellow Dent, and you'll see a lot of different ear styles in there, but there's some long ears in there that are very impressive. The thing about the long ears, the flex ears, is that as population started to go up, ear sizes started to decrease. Flex ear hybrids today, flex ear hybrids since the 60s, have been known to be larger, more robust in their leaf stature, flexing ears with a larger root mass. They utilize water very well, but they have extra spacing. Farmers started to realize that population was very critical to gaining excess yields on really good grounds, and they started to squeeze their populations. And their stock lodging started to happen as we started to press those root masses together. And so the breeding got to going about increasing stock quality, and what happened was we decreased root masses, we made the plant smaller, the ears became more fixed, and it requires more population in narrower rows to make that performance bump happen. So the secondary effect on the feeding side is we went from a nice, tender, soft, starchy plant in low populations with the flex ears to one that's more brittle, more woody, and can undergo green snapping or doesn't feed as well. And so both of those factors happen together. Okay, so when we go to the field now today, the breeders have really taken and eliminated true flex ear hybrids. We call them flex. You know, a couple competitors rate their flexiness on a 1 to 9 scale, and they say anything over a 6 is flexy. And we have that variability in ours, but we tend to just say it's a semi-flex or a semi-determinate. We'll talk about the differences in it. When we grade our hybrids, you know, and we're trying to find hybrids that'll take heat and stress tolerance. So for the Latham market, we're talking south of Ames, all the way down to Missouri, and into that I-80 corridor over into Nebraska and up into the irrigated sands. We want the ability to handle lower population and still have some flexiness. So it'll be semi-flex that flex a lot, or semi-flex that flex a little, or semi-determinate. And we can talk about those. So when we grade hybrids, we do a rating that you've heard us talk about. We take notes on it that you've heard me describe in some of our field days and our kickoff conversations. But we rate the hybrids on girth by length or length by girth. Both flex, but girth by length typically adds kernels and kernel depth given more space and a little length. Length by girth will add length and kernel depth. And we'll show you some examples of how that occurs between dryland and irrigated on two hybrids. Okay, here we are now, and we have an experimental hybrid from the research plot. These are the ears of the hybrid at 30,000 plants to the acre in dryland. This is from the middle of the row, this is from the middle of the row, and this is one of the ears that were on the walkway, the alley that we just got done showing you. The same experimental hybrid in the irrigated plot, middle of the row, and the walkway. Now you can look at that and say, well, if you add up all of those kernels, 14 around by 28 long, 16 by 33, 16 by 45, this hybrid in the irrigated actually has 36 less kernels than the hybrid in the dryland. But this is what semi-determinants does. So it flexes, and when it flexes, it adds kernel rows or subtracts kernel rows first, and it will add length only when there's huge gaps. And so you see how this got very long in the irrigated and quite long in the dryland, but the kernel sizes got very small. This ear, dryland, next to this ear, irrigated, is shorter, but it has 45 kernel rows, or kernels in a row. And so these kernels are much more compact. Now, what matters to you is not these alleyway ears, because that's not what's in your farm. What you have in your farm is these two. And so in the presence of irrigation, and this is at 33,000, 31,000, the tips broke off here, but neither one of them filled to the tip. But this is very semi-fixed or semi-determinate. What it's adding is kernel rows versus here. And the lengths, for all intents and purposes, if we had 100 ears, my guess would the length here would be a few kernels longer. But it's staying very fixed and very determinate. Now, when you're evaluating hybrids, you have to ignore these end plants when we're in these research plots. So you got to walk out and find where everything starts to pressure down, and then you can evaluate what that hybrid's going to do on your farm. And so when we take notes, we're taking notes on these, not on these. Okay? And we'll come back on another hybrid in just a second. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears just a little bit, and we're going to talk about how corn flexes and semi-flexes. And so what we didn't mention was fixed ears, and fixed ears are going to continue to keep the same size throughout the corn plantings, and if you have a gap in the row, the size isn't going to vary a lot. It might fill out the tip a little bit better, but truly fixed ear hybrids, and we have a couple, they maintain the same ear size. They really need to be on very good dirt that you can really push the populations to and that you can feed. If you do that, you'll be rewarded by ears that maintain their ear size all the way through the field, and the kernel depths will stay the same as well. And kernel depth is the important part about flexing. So over here we have now 6477 dryland and irrigated, same setup as we had before. You can see that our kernel row numbers are bouncing as the hybrid flexes in kernel row numbers. Our lengths have increased on the irrigated side, versus the Dryland side. And so overall we've flexed and we've increased length. Now this is a hybrid that is more length than girth, so L by G, whereas the last experimental hybrid was really girth by length. So the difference in the kernels on all of this, the irrigated hybrid has about 1728, and the Dryland hybrid randomly picked has just under 1200. So 500 kernels difference, and looking at the ears you'd say, well, they look pretty much the same. Now the bigger part about this is, as this hybrid flexed, here we have 16 kernel rows, and this ear has 16 kernel rows, both from the middle of the row in their respective plots. They're not that different in length. This has 545 kernels, this one has 608. But what I think the difference is going to be is, although it's 16 kernel rows, what we can talk about is kernel size and kernel depth. This here is the Dryland, this here is the irrigated from the middle of the row, both 16 around. We look at the faces of them and they look fairly similar. You can tell this one, irrigated, is bigger. But the more important thing is when you look at the profile of that kernel, this is a lot narrower than the irrigated in this hand. So that's all weight and money. So not only are we ahead of the game by 50 kernels, we have 50 kernels that are bigger, maybe a little deeper, but certainly a lot girthier. And when that kernel starts to dry itself down, this will be a thicker, broader kernel than this one will. And so we see the big difference in flex on this hybrid. It's showing not only in our length of profile and kernel row numbers, but it's flexing on its kernel sizing. And most determinate hybrids don't do that to a great extent. And so when we're planting 6477 at 32,000 or 33,000 and Dryland at 31,000, we can come away with a flex that looks similar, but they're quite different in their aspects. And to understand the difference, you really need to look at the profile of the kernels as well as just the ears. So be cautious of the salesman that's just throwing ear size to you without understanding kernel count, kernel test weight, kernel density, girth and thickness of kernels. Deep kernels make a lot of money, and that's why, along with the leaf aspect, a hybrid like 6477 is in our profile. I got to tell you, in walking through the plots at that 114 day, 113 day, 115 day level, at this location in both Dryland and irrigated, the three hybrids that we have and that maturity on the book are really putting on quite a show. When you have planting difficulties in some of these hybrids that are rated semi-flex, just don't assume that the semi-flex rating is enough to withstand too low of a population. You know, we started off talking about the 30s and 40s, and in the 30s and 40s we were planting 4,000 to 8,000 plants to the acre. Our ancestors were. Today we have guys replanting if they're 4,000 plants short. Some of that can be avoided if they understand, is it a semi-flex that really can put it out in kernel size and in ear length and in kernel row numbers, or is it closer to the middle range where it may not flex as much like that experimental hybrid we had? So I hope that discussion helped you quite a bit. If you have any further questions, you know how to reach out to me. I look forward to our next conversation, and thanks for watching.